before. Steve will kind of go through this. He couldn't make it today. Since we're like Omic's hosting, I figured I'd kind of run through it. So Wi-Fi I put up there. It was up there earlier. Hopefully you got it. If you need it, just kind of grab one of us. So just some stats of the meetup. We kind of go over these each time as well. Started 2017 October, now up to 520 some members, almost 525. I wanted to put it, but figured I wouldn't lie. And then some of just other missions slash, details of the meetup that we try to kind of go with. We also have our code of conduct. I won't go over all of this, but I want to show it to you. Pretty much just be a good person, and you won't have any problems. So today's schedule, tentatively, unless we need to switch up talks or whatever, I'll be speaking first, and then Sean will go. Matt after that, and then Brad if we need to switch up anything, that's okay. This is also going to be recorded, and we'll try to put it up on YouTube somewhere, so if you need to go back to it, feel free to do that. So before I get started, anybody have any kind of questions about just kind of general stuff here, or anything like that? All right. So we'll just kind of go ahead and get started with the first talk. I'll probably have to sit for this, mainly because I need to type. I'm not a good one-handed typer. So today I kind of wanted to talk about Create React App, dissecting it, what it actually is, and then trying to convince, obviously every project's different, convince you not to use it for your production products. For meetup talks, or if you just really want to try something in React, you don't care about anything else, definitely go for it. But I can say personally that I don't even do that. I never used it. I think it's just because I started React before it was around. And I have some complaints that I have about it. There's definitely good things about it as well. That's why it's kind of so popular. So I wanted to go over those and then kind of walk you through also how to potentially set up your app from scratch. So Doug Miller, I'm a software engineer here at LifeOmic. We have kind of three main products, health product, security product, Jupyter 1, and then we've kind of got our mobile apps, Life Extend and Life Fastening. Our PHC product does actually have a logo. I could not find it to put it on. So this is our new logo. It used to just kind of piggyback off of our actual company's logo. We've got offices in Indianapolis, Salt Lake City, and then here in Durham. We're always hiring Node.js backends for the most part, React front ends across the board, React Native for the mobile app. So definitely a lot of React, TypeScript, Node, GraphQL, Redux. We're using pretty much everything. Our new app that we're working on now is actually using hooks completely alongside of GraphQL. So we try to stay on the cutting edge as much as possible. So starting out, Create React App, for anybody that's not familiar, which most likely everybody is in here, it's from the React team. It's officially supported way to generate a React application. So just kind of an easy way to do it. And really all it takes is one of these two commands, depending on if you like to use Yarn or if you use NPX. Obviously, you'll probably have both installed if you have Yarn, but I usually just stick to Yarn just because I'm used to it. And then I added the -- TypeScript just because I always prefer TypeScript over JavaScript. So every single one of my slides will have TypeScript recommendations on it. Again, you can delete any of the TypeScript stuff and do it in JavaScript if you prefer that. But my personal preference is TypeScript. So again, what is it? Like, what's actually included in it? We heard it was a, one command, no config type of React app. So really all it is a couple packages and configs kind of boiled into one package, React scripts. And then from there, that depends on some other packages of its own, like its Babel preset and some other things. It also has some service worker setup. It's pretty minimal though. You don't really get that much benefit out of it out of the box without kind of configuring it. And then it's got a kind of boilerplate component with it and some styling. This is the directory over to the right side. And for many people, this works. Now, the downside is it also comes with a bunch of other things that you probably won't even use. So pros for it, and of course there will be a cons on the right. Maintained by the React team, so that's great. You know that it's going to be kind of the correct way to set up things. No build config, you don't have to touch the build, it's great. Less to learn, which is, in my opinion, a con, but a lot of people, and including the Create React app on their website, has it as a pro. There's a lot of sane defaults in there, so you can pretty much start any app with it. You can probably get to the 90% and then maybe have to work around some of their stuff later on through other packages like React App Rewired or something like that. TS support is now built into this. You don't have to use a different package. And then I'll kind of go into more of that in a little bit. You also only have one package to update when you need to update your build scripts or your testing scripts or anything like that. It's just a single package, you update it, and it works. And then they do offer the ability to eject if needed. Now, if you do choose to eject, a lot of the files are huge and very confusing because they have to support so many different variations of config. Yes?
What does eject mean?
Eject pretty much means instead of using all of their code and node modules, they copy that out into your directory so that you have full control over it. Like their Webpack config, I think, is close to 600 to 700 lines. It spits that out for you. It just has a lot of stuff you don't need. So when you do eject, you kind of end up spending a day figuring out what you're actually using and what you're not and deleting that and getting rid of packages and stuff like that. But ejecting makes it as if you put everything and it's all in there. So now you're no longer tracking to their React scripts module. So cons, and I made this list purposely bigger. No direct access to build config. To somebody very new to Webpack or building, that may be actually a pro for some. To me, it's a big con. I don't like to see what is going on. I like to be able to see what's kind of going on under the covers. I don't like a lot of stuff happening behind closed doors and all this magic happening in the background. There's a lot of extra dependencies that aren't going to be used, especially for somebody that's, so I prefer style components or some other manner of doing CSS and JavaScript. And so I don't use any of their Sass plugins. I don't use any of the post CSS. I don't use any of the CSS loaders. All that's kind of still there, and I still have to pull all that in when I pull in the package. TS supports through Babel. This is kind of new, and a lot of people are excited about it. There's a lot of caveats to that, though. Well, 2 or 3 off the top of my head. You can't use const enums. Those kind of get compiled during runtime. And then you also can't re-export any kind of typing. So if you're kind of creating a component library and you want to re-export typings from something like a Pharaoh file, which is like an index.js file within, or index.ts file under a folder, you can't do that because Babel has no clue that it's a typing. So it'll still keep that export on the JS file and then cause undeclared imports. So I still prefer and will for a long time, unless they figure out how to get rid of that kind of caveat, using actual TS loader or TSC to compile my TypeScript. Updates can kind of lag behind because it is a single package you're updating. You know, you kind of have to wait for a lot of stuff to get extremely stable before you can update Jest, for instance. You need to make sure that Jest kind of works. You can kind of get those updates immediately instead of having to wait for this package to go through PR and all of its stuff and then finally getting published and then you finally pulling it in. Updates are a little harder to predict because it's one dependency that has 20 or 30 dependencies. So when you go from version to version, you have to really verify what's being updated at what time. And especially if you have any kind of security scanning going on, you could easily run into a lot of different security stuff and prevent you from actually updating just because of one small dependency that you may not even use. Ejecting provides complicated configs, which kind of went over. Webpack configs like 600 lines. The start script is like, I don't know, 700 lines, something like that. It's kind of ridiculous, but it's needed because it needs to cover all the scenarios for somebody to just use it plug and play. And then the big thing that really hits me is that you don't get any knowledge gained of what actually builds your applications. I've talked to many people that just say they use Create React App. Don't know what Webpack is, what Webpack does, what Webpack can do, or that it even exists. And that's something that I think is a problem. When you go to debug your code, you need to actually know how it's being built, especially when you're shipping to production. Again, like a personal application, you know, your website or something like that that doesn't really have customers, that's probably not a big deal. But if you're supporting customers and you come into this build issue and you don't know how to resolve it, it's going to be kind of a problem. So what does it actually take to write your own? Because a lot of people will say that it's you know, it'll take you a week to write your own Webpack config and get all this stuff up and going. It takes really about 30 minutes now. Webpack 4 is way better than Webpack 1 or even pre 1.0. Configs are much more or much less verbose, much easier to reason about. There's way more documentation than there used to be. So yeah, it really only takes about 30 minutes. Now your first time is probably not going to take 30 minutes, but the script I'm going to kind of run through will probably take about, I don't know, 10. So, so yeah, let's see here exactly what it actually takes to write your own. So I've put together this kind of, I've got an example project that has all of this on it. I'll put that in the meetup comments just so you have access to it. But essentially, you're going to create your app. So this is what Create React App does under the covers. When you say Create React App, app name, it will create the directory for you. Then it's going to CD into that directory, kind of run something similar to yarn and knit, which will set up your package.json with the package name and version and just some basic stuff. And then after that, it's just going to add a bunch of packages. Now, this is a condensed list. It doesn't include the testing or any of the linting in here. I kind of wanted to get to the meat and potatoes before that. So this is kind of what it'll load up. Now, the difference is we're using TS Loader instead of Babel with the TypeScript config. And then after that, it's going to make 2 directories, source and public, and then it's going to make the TS config, Webpack, JSON, and then these 2 index files, so the index.html and the entry file for your application. So that's about it. So when you run, that's what happens. Now it actually fills in the files down there with actual data, but they're pretty minimal if you want to do it on your own. Obviously theirs are huge, I've talked about. So here's a TS config. This is like, I don't know, 10, 15 lines. And if you're not familiar with TypeScript, that's fine. This is one of those you can kind of copy, paste, and it'll just kind of work. The 2 top ones are somewhat new. But they essentially just allow you to say import React from React instead of import star as React from React. Now we ran into it, and other libraries probably have figured this out as well. You probably want to turn those off if you're actually exporting a library. It makes it easier for consumers because it doesn't require consumers to have those 2 things set. And so that's kind of the only thing. If they do have those set and you have it set in yours, if you make that you're in a company and you've got packages and you make that the default, you should be okay. But otherwise, you kind of, you know, one or the other. JSX, you set that to React, so we're saying that we're going to transform any JSX to React. These libs are TypeScript typings for the DOM. DOM iterable stuff is just kind of like some extra async things. And then ESNext, so pretty much all the new stuff, just give me the typings for it. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to down compile it to something that works on a browser. So if you're using array.includes and you need to support IE, you still need to add a polyfill for that, but it does allow you to actually use it. Module ESNext, so we're going to be using ES modules because Webpack actually tree shakes out ES modules. If you're using common JS modules, you won't get that tree shaking. ESNext just allows us to use the async kind of import syntax where you're able to lazy load, etc. Module resolution Node, that will always be Node. I've never used it Classic. If anybody knows what Classic does, please let me know. All I know is that it doesn't work if I don't set it to Node. Strict to true, if it's a new project, do that. If it's not, probably stay away. You'll have a bunch of typing errors right off the bat, but keep it strict if you can. It's definitely a good way to go. And then the target, we target modern browsers here. No IE, so we're going to target ES 2016, so Safari, Edge, and Chrome and Firefox. And then I'm just going to tell what directory to include. So I'm kind of going through there. Unfortunately, Webpack config is still big enough that it wasn't able to fit on a slide. I'll go over these quickly. Not going to get into too many details on it exactly, but this used to be much longer, much less documented. But this is really all you need. I think we're only at like 56 lines, and then I could probably still add like file loader, maybe make it 65 lines of code. But for minimal setup, that's really all you need. So I don't know how it gets to be into the 500 range, but it's definitely possible. So we're just going to set up our entry to say, here's my first file. I'm going to use eval in dev, and then if not, I'm going to use source maps. I'll produce those, set it to production or development mode. This kind of is Webpack's new stuff where it automatically adds in a lot of the minifying and deduping and some of that stuff for you. So you don't have to add that like you used to have to. We're going to tell it what extensions to run through. So it'll try TS, then TSX, then MJS, and then JS. This is needed if you're using Apollo client. Just a heads up. Took a while to figure that out, but that is needed. And then copy Webpack plugin. This pretty much says anything from our public directory, move into our dist directory when we're done. So we can add files, favicons, manifest.json, that kind of stuff. It'll get copied. We'll ignore the index.html file because the HTML Webpack plugin will actually move that over. These are the same plugins that Create React App uses under the covers, so that's how it moves the public directory around. It actually has a copy script, but I just prefer to have it in Webpack. They do use the HTML Webpack plugin as well. And then we just have our dev server config here that'll be used if you're using Webpack dev server, which Create React App does use under the covers as well. So I'm going to run through some of this. That's why I'm trying to go through this quick. Just going to add 2 scripts, and that's it. So we're just going to say we want to run Webpack dev server, and then when we build, we want to set Webpack. We're just going to run Webpack and then env prod, and that's it. So that's pretty much everything Create React App does under the covers for you. And it may seem like a lot, but it's really not. It took me, I think today I put this together. It maybe took 5 minutes to run through the whole thing. And most of that was installing dependencies. So I do want to put this up here. This is my like personal setup that every single one of my projects I use. This is just these are my personal preferences. It's not the right way per se, but it is the way that I'm setting up most things. So I'm going to exit out of this, and then I'm actually going to bring up, and we're going to kind of run through a little bit here. So just to show how kind of quick this goes. So this map, and I actually set up in here this React skeleton project. So this is a project that I put up, and I'll include a link to it as well. But I've actually got all these kind of set up to where you can copy paste them. So if you want to do a setup without Create React App, you're actually more than welcome to come in here, just copy all these, and then start from there. Now I do, like I mentioned in the cons, you still do want to know what's going on under the cover. So in the resources kind of slide I gave, definitely go through like the guides that Webpack has, the guides that TypeScript has, and it's definitely worth your time if you can spend it. So kind of just go back here. We'll do the yarn init in this. And pretty much what will happen is it's just going to prompt me for a bunch of things. So I'm just giving it a version, some kind of description. Entry point won't matter. We don't really care. We're not a library. So repository, if I actually have one set up, the author, license, private. I usually just set this to true if I don't plan on actually publishing this. This prevents any kind of accidental kind of publication. So that's about it. And then I'm actually going to copy this real quick. So I'm going to add this init step. This just takes a while to type out, so that's why I'm copying it. I'll add all these dependencies. This should go quick just because they should be in my yarn cache. So, because I just ran this not long ago. So now I've got all my dependencies. I'll go ahead and open up this new project and go through here. So we'll just go ahead and go through and just keep plugging away. Like I said, I mean, this usually takes, these are pretty minimal commands, pretty easy to understand. It should take pretty much no time to get running. After this, all I'm going to do is copy these things into these files. So I'm going to ignore that and move to the project that's actually done. So at the end, this is not the one that's done. So at the end, once I copy all that stuff over, just pretty much run yarn start, and then I should just have a hello world. So this is really all Create React App does for you. And all it really does is abstract a lot of stuff out that you kind of need to do. Because everybody I've talked to uses it for about a month. And then at that point, they add Create React App rewired in to kind of rewire some of these environment variables. And then they start to get to the point where it's like, I really can't do that very well because it's Create React App. And so they'll either just not do it, which prevents you from doing what you want, or they'll eject. And then you have all these files that you didn't write that you have to maintain now. So that's kind of why I don't use it personally. And you know, these configs and stuff are once and done. So even if you spend a week on it, you really don't touch it again unless you need to maintain it. And you'll spend less time finding bugs like this than you would if you had used Create React App. So put some resources here to get on link to all these. And then just want to open up to questions. So I think I may have went over time, I don't know. So I went quick. So any questions about this? You know, feel free to come see me later if you've tried kind of starting one from scratch and you've hit issues, or if you do hit issues, we do have our Slack room, which actually I completely skipped that slide in here. We do have a Slack channel, ReactJS. So if you email this, you can get added to Slack. I'm in there. It's on my computer every day, and it's on my phone. So if you do have a question, feel free. We have an ask or a help channel as well in case you run into a problem. And then there's a Twitter as well. So the Slack's not super active, but people are on it. So if you do ask for help, people respond. So I'm also on the Triangle DevOps one, which is a very active Slack channel. So definitely check it out as well. So yeah, that's kind of all I had. Awesome. I think Sean is up next. Yeah, Sean. You want that to go? And then 229,962. Yeah, 684.
682, 684.
229,962,684. Do you want a 2-man? Yeah, I forgot I meant to do this with you when we were waiting around.
You're ready to go, man. You can pop on. Sure. online figures out how to work.
Sure. Okay, Matt's gonna go because we're getting Sean.
Thank you. Chris, can you allow me to share? Or Doug, you might just stop sharing, dude. Oh, I got it.
Yeah, you
Yes.
should be able to.
Yeah. Okay. You guys ready? This is a little embarrassing because I did use create React app. I actually didn't know it had a TypeScript option, so I just like converted the file by hand when I needed to.
Nice.
That's embarrassing. But okay, so I learned something tonight. Right. So I got a couple of working assumptions here. One is that you're fairly familiar with React already. And ideally, you're familiar with GraphQL, at least conceptually. And what I'm going to show is a tool called GraphQL Gen or GQL Gen that lets you add TypeScript typings around your GraphQL server interactions. And it makes React a lot nicer. It's going to start maybe a little less Reacty, but just trust me, you'll get there. Just stick with me. So, project structure. If you're familiar with Create React app, it should look familiar. I don't think this works because I've really just destroyed it down to something extremely simple. Can you guys see that? Is that too small still?
It's too small.
Yeah, you might
How
need to
about
go
that?
one more.
Does that work? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to work on something called a greeting. And I call it plain because this is the kind of widget you would do if you didn't use any CodeGen at all. And so let me start by showing you the GraphQL schema. So for my server, we have a single query that just takes a name as an option, and it returns a greeting. Presumably the greeting would be something like, hello, Matt, or hello, name. But the key here is that there's a greeting method query, and it takes a name argument and returns some string to you. And so the React Apollo binding has React components that let you really easily insert GraphQL queries into your React tree and deal with the responses. So I'll go through what it looks like without any typing at all to start with. So the way it works is you have this query component, which is React Apollo, and you provided a query, and you provided some variables, and you get a result, and the result comes back with data or maybe an error, and so you're the children of the component are functions that get called when the data changes. So it actually gets loading callbacks, it gets error callbacks, and it gets data loaded callbacks. Now, I want to highlight a couple of things that is bad about this. One is this query that comes from this file I have here. It's just a GraphQL tagged query. And it's okay, but there's no guarantee that this is actually like legitimate query in any way. In fact, the first time I wrote it, it was not. But when I was running the greeting plain, it had no problem just saying like, okay, it's a string, sure, I'll send it to the server for you. But that's not great, especially if you're embracing the whole point of TypeScript, which is to catch bugs earlier in the cycle. Second thing is that variables here, it doesn't check this at all. Like test and test. I mean, this is totally bogus, right? It doesn't match the query in any way, but TypeScript doesn't give me any hints about whether it came wrong. I mean, the server will tell you. As soon as you execute this against a real server, it's going to detect it. But it would be nice if it told you ahead of time. So you can guess that the server does not actually respond to something called greeting bogus. But again, like, it's more than happy to just think that this is going to work, and that's because, you know, you can see here the query result type is any, and it actually tries to guess that the variables were legitimate, which is kind of funny. It would have been better to just say it was any, but it makes it look like you got it right. So this is what you're working with. You don't use any typing at all. So what I would highly recommend you do is install something called this GraphQL code generator, TypeScript client, and React Apollo. You'll see where that comes from. So next thing you do is you create a codegen.yaml file. And you're really just telling it where the files that it's reading are in your directory and where you want it to generate to. The first half, let's say this bit, is where my files are coming from. So I have the schema, which is the greeting schema, which I've already got. And I'm actually going to tell it about the queries that I plan to run too. So this was back to this file here that just had a single GraphQL query. And then below it, I say what I want to generate. So I'm going to do sort of there's sort of levels of adoption with the code gen. You can see here, I'm generating a client TS file, and it's got just TypeScript common, TypeScript client, which is interesting. I'm going to show you what that looks like. But then there's also something called this TypeScript React Apollo, where this is really the key of why GraphQL code gen is so nice for React here. But I'll start with the simple ones so you can get familiar with it. I think that's it. Okay, so the first thing I did was I added in package.json a little script here that just creates a source directory for generated, and then it runs GQL gen. And GQL gen just assumes that you have that code gen YAML descriptor. So I'm going to generate if we haven't broken anything. So the nice thing about that little expanded and then it shrunk it, which is actually pretty slick looking, it will catch parse errors in your query if your query doesn't match your schema, which is pretty nice. So like right away, the first thing I did when I found this, I realized like my query was totally bogus, which is pretty awesome because I actually hadn't even done any real coding. It's just a simple validation that already paid off. So then let's look at what it generated for me. I'm going to look at the client one first. So it generated a couple things here. Greeting for name, which was my query. That's the name it was called. And it's got variables and greeting for name query, which is basically the return type. And these don't look that interesting, but let me show you how you're supposed to use them. So code got a little bit more verbose with typing, but it's a couple things here. So the query actually was parameterized, and you could provide types for the data that's going to come back and the variables that are required. And so with this, I still provide the same greeting that I did before, but it was the same query that was used for the code gen. So I just say, let me find the type associated with it, and I'm going to put it right here for the result, and here for the variables. And then when I did that, now my result is actually typed. And so when I copied the plain one, I'll show you it again. The plain one had result, data, greetings, bogus. Well, when I copied it over, it immediately complained because it's saying, well, wait, no. This data might actually be undefined. You see this, the and or clause. Well, it might be undefined if the return type is actually an error or loading. There's a bunch of cases, and I'm going to punt on handling them all nice and gracefully. But the point here is that just by adding the data type, I could see immediately that my old code was bogus. And I at least needed to handle the case that the data didn't exist. And then once I handled that, it told me that greeting bogus wasn't actually a valid result. Like I was never going to get something called greeting bogus. But I was going to get greeting. And so again, it caught one more issue here. So I just said, well, if there's no data, something's going on. I guess I could have put loading if I was optimistic, but I must have been in a pessimistic mood. But this still isn't perfect because I've got a query here, but I actually don't have any variables at all. So, but if I try to type, let me put one in here. So let me add variables, and I will. And I'll do, I think I had test, bogus, something like that. Okay, and if I hover, it tells me in a very verbose way that test, is it here? Test does not exist in type greetings for name variables, which is great because it actually requires me to have, I think, name. Now it works, which is pretty nice. I mean, I had to, well, I'll tell you the downside of what's going on here, but it gave me a pretty good hint at what I should do. I'm just making sure I don't forget anything here. All right, I want to show you one thing here. All right, so we go back to my query, just demonstrate how nice this was. Let's just say, for instance, I accidentally named this name 2. I'll do yarn generate. So here it's going to tell me right away that this name 2 on greetings field doesn't exist. And in fact, GraphQL is so nice. Look at this. How many tools actually do that? That's incredible, right? That's not GraphQL Gen. They don't get any credit for that. That's just regular old GraphQL. But it's still pretty cool.
But at that point, it introspected.
It introspected my greeting GraphQL schema here.
Right.
And it said, if you're going to try to run that query against this schema, it's not going to work.
Here's the parameter.
And here's some options that you could do. And the proposals are usually pretty good, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, the GraphQL team, and Apollo in particular, has done some really neat stuff with like good tooling. So I've been impressed. Right. Okay. So, you know, this version is actually pretty decent. And I actually thought, like, we went through a phase on the team where we thought this was really good because you get the name, and you get the data types back, you get variables, and you get the greeting is sort of there. This greeting query is validated. But there's one thing that's really subtle here, is that you have to know just how to line up all of these types so that they're like matching each other, right? Like I knew that this variable type matched this greeting query and this data matched this query. Like I had to know that that was true, and I had to make sure that I built my query code just right, like all along the way, in order to make that happen. And so it seems subtle, but if you have a whole lot of components, and let's say maybe the variable name changes, you got to go through and you got to change like 3 places, like for each change you make. And so someone on the team found out that this is the bonus one here, this TypeScript React Apollo. So what I've done here is I'm going to generate a new file called component TSX, and it's going to give me everything I had before, common client. It's also going to add in React Apollo. So look at that. So the top here starts out with the same thing, which is just variables and query. But then it goes a little bit further. It actually sucks in my query, and it kind of like freezes it, keeps it local. And that's because, in my case, I had the query as a JavaScript file already, but we actually have queries packaged as just regular GraphQL files. So it pulls it in so that it's easy to access. But then it actually builds me a React component, and it puts all of my variables, all of my type variables in there automatically. And it puts the query in there automatically. And so my last problem of making sure that like all my type variables lined up is just handled for me automatically. And then it does props as well, presumably based on the variables and other attributes that are allowed. So if I look at the code, if I look at how simple my greeting component can be with this, now it gets just down to this, which is greetings for name component. That's automatically generated. It has all the right typings. Variables are there. It tests the variables like it would before. I don't have to provide the query at all because it's already provided, baked in along with the types. And of course, the result is the same. It's already typed for me, and I get all the same behavior. So yeah, it's significantly less to get wrong here. I mean, the only quirk that I found, and maybe I just didn't do it right. Doug's probably going to show me how this is a dumb thing to do, but if you just take the variables out completely, it still works. That shouldn't. It should complain about that.
They had a casted partial there.
Yeah, I know.
I was wondering why they did that.
Why. I had pulled the very latest version. I swear this doesn't happen normally.
No.
But maybe there's some option I can set to turn it off. Is it there? I don't know. That's weird. Maybe I get a PR, fix it. That seems wrong. If you've got variables and they're all required variables, you should have to provide the variable clause. But
Are they required?
they are required. If you're,
The query shows.
yeah, the query shows it here because this string at the end there, the little exclamation mark says it's required. So let's see if I didn't miss anything. Change component. Yeah. I think that's it. So you saw 3 different versions of progressively adding types. And this one, while small, is riddled with bugs that are not caught. That's the starting point. And the final version, I think, is basically the same size, but it's significantly more type checked. And you don't really have to pay hardly any work for it. So we use this GraphQL generator both on the client and the server, and it's awesome. If you do server-side development, it has the same awesomeness for your resolvers. So it'll generate resolver types for you on the server, which is great. And even though it's not Apollo, it plays pretty well with the Apollo server. So you can generate types with GraphQL Gen and use it on the Apollo server. So that was just me talking nonstop for like 15 minutes. Does anyone have a question? Did any of that make sense? There, I saw a couple heads nod. So, yeah. Okay. No questions? Good. Thanks for listening.
Okay. Sean will go now.
Maybe. Second time.
Yeah.
We'll see what's the charm.
So admittedly, I'm feeling kind of threatened. I'm the only one without a Mac here. I want to make the presentation work better. Awesome. Let's see. There we go. All right, we'll see you later.
That was good.
Yep, that's good.
Cool. It does not look great on my laptop, so. Oh, I know why. Cool. So I guess a quick talk about who I am. My name is Sean Herner. I am a full stack software developer at Citrix. I've been doing more of the backend side for the past month, so I didn't feel comfortable giving a presentation on React because, reasons. So I decided to give a soft skills presentation. Quick sidebar, my voice is losing, so I'm praying to God that I can keep talking for the rest of this presentation. Otherwise, what this talk is not. I want to give a talk. I'm just giving presentations at meetups. It's not going to be a talk on how to do business presentations. We've all gone through those meetings, and you probably did enough in school. It's going to have 3 things to do with React, and none of it's programming, just words. Or it's how to prepare for a conference talk. I've not done that yet, and frankly, I don't know if it's going to set you up for success for an hour-long talk versus 15 minutes. So I guess why am I sitting up here? We started Triangle React JavaScript about a year and some change ago. Steve did the first presentation. It was just create React app basics. And I had said, I've never done a presentation before like that. It'd be pretty cool to do something like that. Sitting through it and working through the nerves of it was something else. The main problem that I had going through it was, what if people have something to say about me? What if I'm not going to give the right kind of presentation? It's that kind of mentality. Lightning talks are great, but it's nice to have kind of variety. So the other reason that I'm up here is I know we have a lot of juniors coming into our meetup. We have a lot of people coming from the boot camps who say, React's pretty awesome. I want to learn more about it. And we welcome them here. But I think that it's intimidating. Sometimes we'll come up and we'll talk about various concepts that are super, super low level React. But one of the things that I've consistently said is, even if you're brand new, your opinions you still have thoughts, you still have opinions, and those kind of opinions actually can bolster a team. I'm a senior at Citrix, but I actually love hiring juniors because they'll ask questions and they will talk to different ways than the rest of the team has talked to. So having that kind of different take can be both a learning experience for someone who's brand new and their peers, and it can be a learning experience to a certain extent for seniors as well. I got my phone up because I had notes for this. I'm trying to do a completely different talk. Yeah. So starting off with the basics, picking your topic. Normally you can do whatever you want here. Get creative, find something that drives you. My very first topic was something that I was very passionate about. It was on TypeScript. I prefer the safety of TypeScript. It was a rubbish talk, but I definitely prefer the type safety and all that kind of stuff. Normally, that's one of the ways you go. You find something that you're passionate about, something you know and love, and you want to share with the world. The other way you could do that I did previously was find something that you don't know anything about. I had barely worked with React server rendering, and I said, you know what? I want to learn that one. We had interested in our code several months before, but it was just nothing to me. So I went and I tried to learn that. It takes a little more effort. You have to definitely know, you have to do some research and figure out what you're kind of going for, but it's definitely something that you can actually work on, and it helps you grow as well as the people that you're talking to. So let's say you want to give a talk. You picked what you want to do. That's great. Sent a message to the meetup group saying, "Hey, I want to give a talk on this." Let's make it happen. So first thing that I've always thought of when I'm going through this is try and keep the group skill set in mind. Again, I said we have a lot of seniors, we have a lot of juniors. Traditionally, I try and go and I talk towards the middle of the road. So there's going to be some things that the juniors might not know about. There's going to be some things that the seniors know a lot about that's not relevant to them. But it's kind of a group learning mentality there. The only real thing to keep in mind right now is how bold you want to be. So both Doug and Matt, they did live coding exercises. Pretty bold. It was practice and definitely rehearsed, but doing a live coding exercise means that you might typo. And you have to hope that you can find it in the next 5 minutes, otherwise it starts getting weird.
Real weird.
Usually you're sweating over the keyboard and you start seeing the sweat droplets fall. That's the worry. It's awesome when it works. You can pull out some really cool designs, really cool implementations. You can go middle of the road and do what I did last meetup and kind of cheat where you print out all your contents and then type it up so you have like a backup guide in paper. It was weird printing out code. Or you can just talk like I am. It's not as potent sometimes, but it's also a good way to get introduced to just warming yourself up to giving these kind of talks. So writing the presentation, do it how you feel best comfortable. If you feel like you're best by hashing it out slowly and then filling in the contents, that's great. If you feel like you want to put all kinds of weird order, okay, cool, good luck. And on presentation tools, this is a personal take of mine. There's a ton of React slideshow tools that are fantastic. There's MDX slides and there's Spectacle. They're awesome. They look, you can basically code your presentation in React, do whatever you want with it. My personal take is that they make it way harder for you to get your job done. This is done in PowerPoint because I didn't like the styles that Google Slides offers for that kind of thing. And you know how this one took me about a half hour to do. In the same half hour of MDX slides, I had gotten to slide 2. So personal take is that those slow you down and they can kind of be a hindrance to you getting your tasks done and what you want to get presented for that minute. While I'm talking crap about other companies, Google Slides can be awesome. I love the fact that you can go anywhere. You can link the article there. It's not great for presenter view, and historically PowerPoint would be, but I have one screen. The thing that I found that happens here, this text is normally microscopic. You can increase the size and all that, but the slides are always going to be that size. So you do a lot of, if your notes aren't verbatim from your slides, you're going to do a lot of back and forth looking at the slides, trying to figure out what you're talking about. Not really a bad thing, just something that it might cause some nerves later as you work through it. So let's say you're talking about it and you get your presentation going, you're trying to build it up. Or let's say you didn't, and oh my God, I procrastinated, I need help doing this last thing, I can't really do it right now. Software developers are really good at procrastinating. I can tell you that this presentation didn't fully exist until 24 hours before today. I believe some of the other presentations didn't exist until about 6 hours before today. We're really good at this. You got this though. Work it out. If you want to change your style, that's great. You want to change how you're doing it, that's great. Also keep in mind if it's not going to work out for you, we can change the meetup right until the minute starts. So if you change your topic, no one's going to notice. Giving the presentation. So when you're giving the presentation, this is your 15 minutes of fame. This is the time you get to talk to the team, talk to everyone, tell them what you learned, tell them your passions, kind of talk it out. One of the things I'm not afraid to admit is I might not know the most in the room, but it's my time to convey what I do know in the room. That also brings the point of, well, what if someone asks me a question that I don't know the answer to? Entirely possible. Definitely been in presentations like that. I've even done work presentations like that, which is fantastic. That's okay. If you don't know it, and usually this pretty helpful group will try and help everyone get the right answer, but if you don't know it, feel free to follow up. It's no major pressure. It's not going to yell at you or anything like that. The only thing to keep in mind is that when you're talking, you are the subject matter expert. There might be people who ask questions pointed to it, but you are the subject matter expert. Cool. Oh, one other thing that I'd like to mention here is, aside from today, you don't have to stay behind the computer the entire time. I like to normally move around when I'm talking, kind of point things out, kind of just make sure people are still tracking. You don't have to do that. If you're comfortable staying where you're at, that's cool too. So you gave your presentation, it went well, or maybe it didn't. That's cool. You learned something from it. Congratulations, you did it. One of the things that I like to do when I'm following up on a presentation after I'm talking to people is find out the place where people had questions. If it was, so I did a presentation on React Server and someone said, well, is it actually a service that runs on the server or is it like statically rendered? And I realized that my slides didn't actually talk to that. So questions might point out something you could do better in your slides, and questions might be something that you wanted to do or that you can bolster in your slides for future reference if you ever want to look at it. Thing I didn't actually mention was before you do the presentation, you might want to share any code you have on Meetup. If not, it's cool too. But after the fact, make sure you share that. It first off lets the community say, oh, well, this one was a pretty interesting project. I want to see it and I want to actually run it locally. The other thing it lets, it's also good for employers and coworkers and other companies to say, oh, he's actually active in the local community. He has on the same local community. Let's look into him some more and figure out what makes him tick. That's really all I had to say. I had planned on giving this talk about 4 months ago, and Dan Abramov wrote an article about it, and I said, well, then it looks like I'm copying him. And his points are actually slightly different. He talks to how he thinks of topics and how he builds up presentations. I agree with some things, I don't agree with some things. It's normal human opinion. He's definitely given way more conference talks than I have, though, so maybe I should listen to him. If anything in here has inspired you to even give a talk, and you don't know what to talk about, feel free to ask your peers. I mean, ask them what they don't know. Ask them what they've always wanted to learn. Use it as a learning experience. And if you're really desperate, go in the general channel on our Slack and ask. We can figure out all kinds of fun stuff that if you're bored, you want to look into, it's fun to do. That's it for me, though. And I'm glad that this actually worked out and my voice is kept. So anyone have any questions?
I have one suggestion.
Of course.
Something I've tried for a while is like, because I know that I'd like to talk at more meetups. Whenever I have an idea for a talk, even if I have like no content at all, I just put it in a list in Evernote. And so I have an Evernote page full of things that are somewhat unique to what I do at work. Like maybe most friends don't currently do it. Something like the type gen. So it just goes into a list, and I don't do anything more then. And if something comes up like this, then you can look at the list and say, oh, right, I could flesh that out. I could turn that into a talk. But thinking about it and capturing it just takes 2 minutes. And by the time you know it, you've got this whole long list of potential talk ideas that you could go to.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Cool. Anyone else?
Also, yeah, another thought. If you're interested in picking up tools to be able to speak properly, to present as well as you could, there's a group called Toastmasters. Yeah. As it works on your speech presentation, your organization, how to give yourself vocal variety, movement, that kind of thing.
Cool. Good.
Isn't soft skill is a human skill, actually? If you really think about it, it's a human skill, but we name it soft skill. That's just for one thought.
Yeah.
Start labeling that.
Cool.
It was a good presentation.
Thank you. Anyone else? Awesome.
Very cool. So hopefully that encourages everybody to speak. Like Sean said, it's not, there's no risk to it. We all help each other through. I mean, I hated public speaking up until I started doing presentations. The more you do it, the easier it is. The 6-hour presentation he mentioned was me. I did this at lunch today, my whole thing. I didn't rehearse, I didn't go over anything. And that's fine. If you stumble, it's no big deal, especially in these kind of settings. Conference talks obviously are a little bit more prestigious, so you probably don't want to stumble in those. But that's why these settings are so great, because you can work through that and then hopefully get to the conference talk and do that. So, all right, Ryan.
So after hearing that talk, realize I'm probably doing things all wrong.
No, that's an opinion.
No, I'm just giving you a hard time. So as far as this presentation, Matt, contacted me about 24 hours ago. He's like, hey, do you have any topics? And I didn't have that list, which I now need that list. So I had to think a little bit about what might be interesting. My name's Brad Morris. I work at SAS, manage a development team there. And we are relatively new to working with React. My team is part of data visualization, research, and development. My team's been doing JavaScript front-end web development for a little while. We're using frameworks that are jQuery based, and recently are starting on a project with React. So about 6 months that we've been doing React. But we've been doing WebAssembly for as long as WebAssembly's been around, which I guess in major browsers for about a year and a half, 2 years maybe. But WebAssembly, what is WebAssembly? WebAssembly is it is a binary executable format that is run natively by JavaScript engines. It is developed primarily as a compiler target. People aren't generally going out, unless it's just your hobby, to write WebAssembly by hand. This is, there are several different tool chains out there that are targeted towards generating WebAssembly. There's Rust to WebAssembly compilers, there's C++ to WebAssembly compilers. It is some of the benefits. Its goal is close to native speed in your web browser. It comes pretty close in some key performance benchmarks. Really, if you've got something that's purely number crunching, that's where it excels. If you need to interact back and forth across the JavaScript WebAssembly bridge, that's where things are generally slower. But there's a lot of stuff going on right now with, like I said, if you're putting out some modules that are doing some hardcore computation, you see a lot of that going on right now. And then some of the first usages of WebAssembly were for game engines that had ported their, say, C++ game engine, and I know Epic with Unreal Engine did that, that's been kind of popular in the past few years. This is all influenced by technology called ASM.js, and ASM.js was even weirder than WebAssembly, if you think about it. This was the original idea of, hey, I've got the C++ code, can I compile that in some way to run the web? ASM.js was, unlike WebAssembly, which is its own binary format, ASM.js is a very specific subset of JavaScript that the guys at Mozilla said, hey, we can figure out how to interpret this differently, basically using the quirks of JavaScript language in order to be able to utilize those syntactical weirdness of JavaScript that would allow a JavaScript program to, if the browser didn't know it was ASM.js, it could just run like normal JavaScript, or it could, if it did know it was ASM.js and it understood ASM.js, it could then compile that through its ASM.js pipeline and get pretty good speed. And that's kind of where all this came from. And there's probably the most popular tool chain that exists right now for WebAssembly generation is Emscripten. That again came from ASM.js and the work that was done in Mozilla. And it's specifically for C++ to WASM generation. So where does that kind of fit in with React? Well, if we go back several years to why we started getting interested at SAS at first ASM.js and then WebAssembly, we have a really, really large existing code base of portable C++. And the reason we do is we work on, so I mentioned I'm in data visualization, and we work on some products centered around data exploration, and reporting. And we had clients, we had native clients in iOS. Started in iOS, then we had an Android client, a Windows mobile client. And the commonality between these things is that they could all run C++, right? The iOS app and the Windows app could run it natively. Android could use JNI bridge to run the C++ code. And our applications were very visual. That was the main output, is our graphics, our data visualizations. And so we had direct access to OpenGL, things like that, that we could program in C++. They could use that natively from those platforms. And so we got a lot of code reuse and consistency across the suite. That was great. Then we came along and said, hey, well, we want to take all this and we want to, we're shifting everything to the web. We want to create a web client for this application. And that was probably, I don't know, 5 years ago when we started looking at that. And we said, well, I don't want to write all of that in JavaScript. So we said, well, what are our options? And there were some weird libraries at the time that were trying to actually take C++ code and compile it like logically. I've got a class here. I want to somehow make a class in JavaScript or whatever. That didn't work out so well. But then we stumbled upon AsmJS that was kind of ramping up at the same time. So that's how we got onto that path. And what we, people like, my friends here thought we were crazy. This is nuts. You're compiling, you're doing what? You're compiling C++ to JavaScript. And we were, but it worked for us. And it saved us a lot of work. We could have never supported all the functionality we had without doing this. And then things started to kind of change, and WebAssembly starts to emerge. And so that's now a W3C standard, supported all major browsers, modern browsers. I guess IE people still use that. Yeah, so that came along, and we kind of evolved our tool chain and how we were using Emscripten to output both AsmJS and WASM. WASM is the short term for WebAssembly. I'll probably say that most from now on. This is, and by the way, I will get to React at some point, I promise. Again, I'm talking to my strong suit, so I've been doing React for 6 months or so. My strong suit is the WebAssembly, so ask me questions on that and not the React stuff. But this is kind of our multi-platform architecture here. So basically, we've got this big chunk of C++ in the middle here, and that's our app layer. That's common across all of our platforms, all of our hosts. And so we have a core team that's business logic. That's the graphics for the data visualizations. And that's all here. And then kind of if you go up more towards the UI, what you have is a layer of what we call our wrappers. And so this is that layer, this is this interface between the web for us, and then Android kind of needs this layer as well in order to interact with C++. And so this is automatic code generation. So if you think about kind of your business logic you have down here, we use XML as our representation for models and controller APIs. And we have a lot of code gen that happens. We have automatic code gen for the C++ models. We have automatic code gen for our JavaScript, now TypeScript wrappers. So we love robots. They do all our work for us. And we get multiple hosts writing host-specific UI, right? So, here on the web, I'll talk about what we had. We had a jQuery-based application framework. So we're writing componentry there to render HTML, and all the other hosts are doing the same thing. On the reverse side, you've got, and of course that's using the wrappers to get the business logic, get the information in and out of the application layer. So on the reverse side, you've also got, sitting at the root, you've got your host, you've got your platform. Our platform is the web, right? And there has to be a way for the application logic itself to interact at a core layer. And that's where this is, this platform abstraction layer. So that's our access to system resources, essentially. So from an application point of view, you've got C++, it needs to make network requests to get resources from the server and make REST API calls. That's all initiated in our business logic. It comes through this platform abstraction layer. And then for us, the web, it's like, okay, great, make a fetch, right? And this abstraction layer is also written in C++. We have specialized C++ that's doing the right thing to connect to our pieces for the web. So that's kind of a high-level view of how that works out. This is a little bit breaking down that middle C++ layer. Like I said, you got business logic, where you're pulling in other third-party C++ libraries, helper libraries, whatever. But the main thing to think about here is that business logic. So that was great, and that worked out well for us, mainly because of this point here. So what am I talking about here? The challenges that we hit when we started. Sorry, this is a really dense slide. I'll try to hit kind of one by one. We came to React, and we wanted to fully embrace reactive programming, the patterns that React was meant to support, mainly being kind of that one-way data flow with Flux, and that became problematic. And so that's really where things started to get interesting, and probably where I think it applies to this group. So here are kind of some of the challenges that we had, right? We've got that business logic that's sitting there at the C++ layer. For us, we've got it wrapped up in a big WASM module. It's got some API we can call. It's firing events and giving us data, but there's application state in there, and I don't control it, right? I control the inputs and the outputs, but I don't control it. So how does that fit in with what we're planning to do with Redux, right? That's supposed to be our application state. So, what are our options? How are these things going to gel? Really, the big thing is all of our C++ controllers, and I said controllers, it's an MVC pattern, right? That worked out fine in our previous architecture that we were using. What am I going to do with a controller here? We're not MVC. I'm not creating an MVC client-side app. How does that fit into Redux? How do I maintain that unidirectional data flow was a big question. There's async going on with the WASM, right? No different really than making an async network call. But it throws, a little bit, some problems arise because of that. This is a big one too. And I did mention this one talking about WASM. Retain, release, memory management. So remember the WASM, this is C++ underneath the covers. And so everything there is manual memory management. There's no garbage collection. We use modern C++, so we're using smart pointers. Smart pointer is essentially reference counting in a smart way. It works nice in a fully C++ environment. But when you start crossing that bridge over to JavaScript, I mentioned these wrappers. Essentially a wrapper, and this is object-oriented, very much so C++, MVC. I've got, say, a controller object, and it comes across what I'll call the bridge, right? The WASM, the WebAssembly to JavaScript bridge. I've got a hold of it. I've got this object. I need to make sure the memory doesn't go out of scope, right? On the C++ side, WebAssembly inside of that thing, it's got its own heap in there. It's doing its own thing, and I got to make sure that stuff doesn't get collected, right? So I retain manually. And this is kind of probably the biggest downside between the boundary between JavaScript and WebAssembly and using something in WebAssembly that is more than just a bunch of function pointers. And that's how am I going to really work with these things like any other library. We try to make it as easy as we can. We do a lot of things automatically. But if you're taking ownership of an object, you still have to retain and release explicitly. And I don't want to deal with that in my React components. I don't want to deal with that in Redux. How am I going to do that and make me not be able to mess up as a developer? I want to protect everybody. I want to make it easy. I want to make it automatic. So that was a really big challenge that I'll speak to in a little bit. And then there's the data visualization rendering side of things. I'm not going to go into kind of our mechanism is essentially we render to canvas, right? So we've got hooks under the covers that let the C++ code make canvas drawing calls, canvas 2D drawing calls against the canvas context. But how am I getting that canvas? How am I hooking that up with WebAssembly? I'm going to keep my React tree separate. I don't want it intermixing with the WebAssembly for various reasons. I mean, really, it's this isolation concept, right? For maintainability, for testability, I want to be able to test all of my visuals separate from my WebAssembly. I want to test my WebAssembly separate from my visuals. So let's try to keep them as separate as possible. And we didn't really know exactly how to do this at first. But one thing I did know is, okay, we're jumping on React, we're jumping on Redux. What else new can we jump on? And so ReactJS was like, yes, reactive. Okay, let's do that. So I said, okay, well, middleware on Redux sounds nice. It sounds like it's a way to isolate out those pieces. And that's where, okay, if I'm doing Redux, well, it looks like people are doing, their async network calls maybe from some middleware. They're using middleware for that sometimes. Okay, that sounds like I could write some middleware. Oh, I don't need to write middleware. I've got Redux observable. So essentially, for those that aren't aware, that's the intersection of RxJS and observables and middleware for Redux. And so what I'll show you in the next slide or in a few, you basically create this thing called an epic. And it's this entry point where you've got, essentially, it's like I say here, it's actions in, actions out. You keep that kind of one-way unidirectional flow. But I saw this as an opportunity to take our big, complicated black boxes WebAssembly and shove it off to the side underneath the middleware and hide it, right? And so if you could do that, that at least hit one of our goals of that isolation. And Redux Observable really came to the rescue here because it solved a lot of our problems right away. I mentioned the retain release and that problem. The great thing about RxJS and functional programming in general, but observable streams themselves, they naturally have their life cycle. They are subscribed to, and they are unsubscribed. And so it has a life cycle. It has teardown. It has a way for us to manage our life cycle and our ownership of those controllers that we want to hang on to, and do that in a very natural way through observable streams. And so that's that ownership of controllers. And I'll show a little bit of code later, just a little snippet. I got to show some code instead of just, I'm not going to live code, but
Come on, you got this.
I know. So we got that ownership of controllers, the life cycle. That was really nice. We've got kind of the data flow here fits in really well. You've got UI-driven actions that are kind of, actions being dispatched, and I'll show a little diagram here in a second, end up making their way into that middleware, where that's our entry point for our inputs into the WebAssembly, right? Making WebAssembly calls. And then you have the reverse. You've got streams set up. You've got these lifetimes of a controller, and you can kind of tie this MVC architecture together with this unidirectional data flow through the lifetime of an observable. And so you've got controllers firing events, and you've got that observable stream also streaming actions back out, feeding your store, right? So there's the async bit where I don't know what's happening in this black box. I'm not developing that app code. I just know the API, right? So I've got inputs and I've got events coming out, and that's feeding my state. And so that worked really well. Probably the biggest hack in this whole thing is the canvas, and it's not, I mean, it's DOM. There's no way to separate that out. And so we just kind of said, well, we just have to do this, and let's hook these things up in the least, the least disgusting way. And so essentially, right, you've got the React component itself owns its own canvas, and it says, hey, register me. Here's my ID, or here's the ID of the canvas, and I'm this visualization, and that fires an action. And then that's handled off in the black box. And then the black box pieces in our WebAssembly and our infrastructure, I failed to mention this before, they still have to exist in other JavaScript environments as well that are not React. So there's a lot of standalone pure JavaScript there that handles kind of binding a canvas to the underlying C++ view that's happening. So that kind of all gets to happen naturally, but outside of this code. It's not this code base that's dealing with it, so that's nice. So that was the only part that was really awkward. This is that kind of data flow. I talked to my team for probably 15 or 20 minutes about how to draw this correctly, and none of us could agree on what the actual right diagram is. This gets the point across, right? And so we've got our React components. They're firing actions. They hit the reducers. This is like the third version of this. They hit the reducers, and then they hit our epics. And that action may end up calling into WebAssembly and producing at that time no actions out, right? It's just we're putting inputs into WebAssembly, but probably what's happening, that's doing a bunch of work, and that's firing events over here that are hitting other epics that are other streams, observable streams, and they're firing out other actions. So I'm making changes on this widget in the UI here, firing actions. It's making its way into WebAssembly, and all of a sudden, this visual over here changes. It's because we did some business logic down in the black box, and all of a sudden, I got actions out over here that are going to drive my UI. And so this is nice. I kind of get my one way, and then I get some business over here that I just close my eyes, and I don't have to look at it. So that's the kind of the general flow. So just as an illustration, I'll show a little bit of code. So this is, we've got a couple different epics. This is the main one because we're dealing with MVC. We've got a lot of controllers. And so I'll point out kind of the main pieces here. An epic really, what it is, it takes actions, it takes the current state, and you can forget about this guy, it doesn't matter. And then what you do is actions, everything, the syntax here, if you don't know, RX, that's, so everything with the $sign after it, that's an observable stream. That's an observable. And so I've got actions. I'm saying I want to pick out only things that are of type load bird model. Don't worry about bird, but it's a model. And that, in fact, it's an event or it's an action type where it's going to come along with the controller. So I'm going to pluck out the controller. And I'm going to merge map that with this big thing that I'm going to create in the bird model controller. That's kind of where the magic starts happening. And I'll point out kind of some nice code down here where really we can write little helpers like this, like with retained, right? And that's me hiding the fact that we're taking this controller, we're actually retaining it, but because it's returning another observable that itself has a lifetime, I can manage that object, but I can hide it out in this thing that nobody really has to think about it. They just follow the pattern, and it works nicely. And I'm going to take this thing until it's finally unloaded at some point. And that's managing the whole lifetime of the controller. So when I get down into the actual code, I'll show you an actual loader for a specific controller. then I don't have to worry about my lifetime of my controller. I know it's handled for me by this boilerplate code that happens kind of up high before you get down into the individual kind of controller code. And so here's an example of loading a controller, and this is where we get into really what we're doing is we're saying, I've got this controller, it is now alive, create an observable stream that is going to be alive for the lifetime of this controller, start listening to events from it, right? Start handling actions that come in. So basically for all of these controllers that we have on the WebAssembly side, we have some code that looks like this. It says, for this controller, here's how I want to handle it. And it generally follows this form. So we got this little helper from portable event. That's really great. I can hide away all of the add event listener, remove event listener stuff that's going on in my WebAssembly code. And I can just return an observable. And I can be very RX reactive here. And so I'm saying, okay, I want to listen for data change events on this controller. And I want to pipe that into a map. And when I do, I want to dispatch a set breadcrumbs action. And here's how I'm here's the data I'm sending over to my reducers, right? And so this is that data flow coming from WebAssembly, hitting our Redux state. And this is the reverse. I'm taking in my action stream. I'm going to pluck out, I want to handle the select breadcrumb action type. And I want to filter it by some key. And then I want to call set drill level, which I didn't put that on the slide, but all that's doing is saying, okay, I've got a graph element controller, do some logic here to call down into WebAssembly and pass this data in and say, here's my new drill level, right? And so that's that reverse data flow there, the arrow pointing to the WebAssembly. And this is a case where I'm not actually going to continue on, and I don't have an action to keep flowing through the stream. So that's kind of the RX, like, okay, in this, no actions out in that case. So what you end up with is a nice encapsulated way of taking MVC and fitting it into Flux. And that way we get to write pure React code, and we don't have to worry about the business of WebAssembly. And that's it. Any questions?
From that last slide, so the uptype, the filtered payload, or the from portable event, how much of that did you guys write versus how much is that as like part of the Redux?
Sure. Uptype is just essentially a specialized filter that comes with Redux Observable.
Okay.
Filter payload ID, that's our little helper function based on kind of, we know what the structure coming in is, and we want to kind of pluck some things out and kind of pass that along. Tap is RX. From portable event, that's ours. That's just a simple event registration and a teardown, converting that into an observable. Yeah, so trying to use what's built into RX as much as we can, write little helpers to, once we find a pattern, we're like, oh, I've done that like 5 times now. Let's stop doing that 5 times. Yeah.
So both of those, at the end, that set breadcrumbs and set drill level, are both essentially actions to your modifier state?
That's an action. That is not. Like set drill level is a local function that's out here. That's actually the reverse. This is dispatching an action. This is actually doing a little more logic before we call a method on the controller to pass that data in.
But so then your merge, then it does both. That one pipe.
Yep.
Does both.
It does, and that's the beauty of RX observables.
But it's like it get 2 types of things coming in, and some go this way and some go that way.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You don't always have to have something coming out.
Yeah.
Right. And part of it is, we could have done this a little bit differently. We wanted to keep the loader. So this itself is not an epic. This is just our little incarnation of what loading a controller means. So we have, if you're going to load a controller, you have this interface, and you return one observable, right? And so most things look like a merge, right? It's a merge. We overuse merge map everywhere because if you don't know how to do it, just merge map it, and then that works. Yeah. So, any other questions?
So all of your WebAssembly generated from C++. If somebody was going to get into WebAssembly, what would your opinion be? Like, what should they write? Should they write it in Rust? Like, that seems to be popular. Should they just do C++, or?
My immediate question would be, why are you getting into WebAssembly?
Yeah.
If it's just for fun, go with whatever language you know already that already has tool chains set up. The C++ tool chain is pretty extensive, and there's a lot of good documentation on scripting. I've never used any other tool chains. And so, yeah, I think that my first question is why? Just for fun? Sure, go with what you know. The next question is, okay, well, I want to do it because we're going to ship something. Well, again, do you really just not want to write it in JavaScript? Or I don't see WebAssembly as a JavaScript replacement. Right? It's not going to be. It's hard to deal with all the caveats and issues with WebAssembly, and JavaScript is just so fun. Why would you not want to write it?
Your main motivation was because you had all that legacy code.
Yes, we did, and that's the kind of why. Well, a lot of times it's, well, I've got code in this language. What can I do with it? Or maybe it's another type of, I see that we're going to need to do a lot of multi-platform stuff. And I don't want to go, say, React Native. Yeah, maybe you want to start out, angling towards a WebAssembly. I don't know. It really hit our hotspot, which is, right, it's like, it filled that gap. It's like, we have this code, what do we do with it? Oh, we just compile it.
You said the slow part was bouncing back and forth between the WebAssembly and JavaScript,
Yeah.
that binding. Like, how
it's actually a lot faster now. There's slow, and like, what does it take to make a raw single call one way or the other? That's what the browsers are working on, and they've improved that. I don't know metrics. For us, what's slow is all the overhead crap we do to make things easy to code on our side, on the JavaScript side. And like, the only real way to call a function in WebAssembly is to call that function. WebAssembly itself is never going to be object-oriented. So if I have something that represents a controller and I want to call a method on that object, that is not a function call, right? That is a lot more than a function call. And then there's all the parameters that I want to pass. If they're an integer, or if they're a number, if they're a string, it's okay. There's some built-in stuff. There's overhead. But really, if it's a number, that's the easy one. If it's a number, that's easy. If it's another object, that's where we wrote tooling around that, right? And so that's where our wrappers come in. And that could be a whole other talk. But it's essentially, yeah, we developed a thing called a closet. It's where it's like, think of it, I've got an object, it's on this side, I want to stick it in a closet, and you just give me a pointer to it. And that's, it's a memory reference, or it's a, right, it's a number. And it's a pointer. And I want to pass that pointer across. Well, now if I want to call a method on it, I need a way to reference that. Well, okay, it's its closet ID, right? And pass that across, because numbers are easy. And I got to pull it out on the other side. And then I got to do something with it. I got to convert all my arguments. And that's the overhead, right?
So you said you had some kind of like jQuery-based JavaScript frameworks and libraries before React. So if you were building something today with WebAssembly, would you have to still have some kind of other thing to do, like your UI or presentation?
No. You mean, so are you asking, could I just use WebAssembly and have it do all the work for me? I don't know if anybody's building that library right now. I thought about it. Like when we said we were going to do React, I was like, okay, that's good. Can we just automatically generate React from the C++ side, right? Like, and actually build up our tree there and have that binding where I'm not even actually writing any JavaScript. I'm just writing a C++ application that has a layer that can produce a view. I'm sure that'll come along soon. I don't know of any right now, but okay.
All the Canvas stuff, does WebAssembly directly like work with the Canvas through like WebGL, or does it still contact JavaScript to make the, move this to X0? Or
yeah, it still works at the JavaScript level. Okay. So that's part of our platform or what do I call it? It's the layer at the bottom, right? It's a resource, gotcha. And that's the rendering resource, I guess. Yeah. Other questions? All right. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all we have for talks today, unless somebody made one within the time that things were going on. So thanks for coming out. I think we try to do them monthly, so April-ish may have one. I think Citrix is next up to host. Official? Not official yet. Not official. Okay, so it might be at Citrix again if people came. They're downtown Raleigh. They do have a parking garage though, so that makes it a lot easier than some of the other places downtown. So yeah. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you.
I don't see that.